Roger Stone here for Colonial Metals Group. Colonial Metals Group helps Americans protect their future with the most trusted store of wealth in human history. That's actual physical gold and silver. If you're retiring or you're retired, go to colonialmetalsgroup.com/stone right now for your free Roger Stone Colonial Metals Group Retirement Protection Kit. Or call 800-747-6589. That's 800-747-6589. Call now to receive your free home safe and up to $7,500 in free silver.
A common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
With us today is the Pulitzer-winning columnist of the New York Post, Michael Goodwin, and he's always got something really, really important to report to us. Michael Goodwin, the world's coming to an end, in my opinion, unless we turn it around. Where are we?
Oh, well, thank you, John. I agree. We're deeper in the weeds than I think a lot of people realize. The protests, the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protests, have now become normalized. We see them so often, the flags over the bridges, the graffiti, fighting with cops, blocking traffic, etc. We see these things so often in New York and elsewhere on college campuses, of course, that we begin to say, well, yeah, there they go again. And that's a sign of acceptance, that we have come to believe that these things are routine, maybe even normal, that this is what kids do or this is what some people believe. This is anti-Semitism. We cannot normalize anti-Semitism. We cannot accept that as something that just happens and some people believe that. No, that's out of bounds. And I think we have to say it more loudly and more often. And I think the government leaders in particular have been silent. You think about, when is the last time Kathy Hochul or Eric Adams condemned anti-Semitism or any of these campus riots or any of this graffiti? Or where are they? Why? I mean, have they accepted it as inevitable and therefore it's politically a dead ender for them to criticize it?
I will give you my opinion on Kathy Hochul and whoever else. They are scared to do it because they are scared from repercussions from whoever is running the White House right now.
Well, and I think they're also, because they're Democrats, there's no question that these are not even potential Republican voters doing these things. These are Democrats ultimately, or they don't vote at all, or they vote for some wacky other party. But they are leftists, and Governor Hochul and Mayor Adams need to appeal to the left wing of their party. And so I believe they're intimidated by the politics of these despicable demonstrations and protests. I mean, how can they accept this in the city and the state? It's not normal. And it really does, when people say this is how it started in Germany in the 30s, I used to think that was an overstatement. I'm now starting to think they might be right. This does have a feeling of permanence about it, and the vehemence. It's not affected by, even say, when the hostages are murdered and tortured. It's not affected. That they don't take a break and say, okay, let's let things calm down. They come out the next day supporting Hamas with their keffiyehs and sometimes their Hezbollah headbands and the Palestinian flags. So they're not deterred by the brutality and the terrorism. In fact, they're fine with it. That's really scary.
Michael Goodwin, you wrote a column about the New York Times. And I knew a lot of the New York Times owners in the past, and the people that wrote it, and they were decent people, but things have changed over there.
Yeah. John, journalistically, I grew up there. I got a job there right out of college as a clerk, and eventually worked my way on to the reporting staff. And I learned a tremendous amount of things there in terms of fairness. You know, people say, oh, you have to be objective. At the New York Times, I learned, no, not objective, because we don't really believe anybody can be objective, but you can be fair. And there's ways to measure fairness in your stories, whether you've accurately portrayed the two sides of an argument, whether you've given both sides a chance, an equal chance to comment, to explain. But what's happened now, and it started during Donald Trump's first run for the White House, the Times took away the guardrails. It doesn't exist anymore. Now you are essentially free to give your opinion every day. And so you read the New York Times, and every story is an opinion, whether it's culture, theater, sports, business, book reviews, and of course, politics, climate change, race, gender, all of these things are radicalized in the New York Times. And so the subject, that's the backdrop to the column that you mentioned. It was the publisher of the New York Times, Arthur Gregg Sulzberger, the fifth male of his family to run the New York Times. It's an inherited position to be publisher. It's a public company, but not really. And so he's written this op-ed, which appeared in the Washington Post. So the publisher of the New York Times writes an op-ed in the Washington Post, means both institutions think this is really important and we're all behind it, in which he basically says Donald Trump is a threat to freedom of the press, just like Viktor Orban and Brazil and India. And but by the way, we're not political. We're not wading into politics here. But Donald Trump is a threat. This is classic New York Times. Oh, yes, we're neutral. No, you're not. Nobody in the world thinks you're neutral. It's a little-known fact, John. The New York Times has not endorsed for president a Republican since Dwight Eisenhower in 1956. That means no matter who the Democrats put on the ticket, going to get the New York Times support, which usually means the Washington Post, which has never endorsed a Republican for president. And it means herds of other media that follow along what they consider their bell cows.
But don't they realize that Kamala Harris is not qualified?
She's qualified by virtue of being a Democrat. Any Democrat will do, and she will get their backing. Have you noticed they're not pushing her to release policy plans? They're not chasing the Tim Walz story. By the way, for our listeners, there's a wonderful editorial on the Tim Walz deceit over the years about his record and other things in the Las Vegas, Nevada Review Journal, I believe it's called. It's an editorial, and it told me things that I hadn't known about that. So I think the New York Times and its ilk are simply not to be trusted. And that column that Arthur Sulzberger wrote is really just another form of misinformation.
Understood. Well, we're out of time. Thank you, and keep fighting for America.
My pleasure, John, and I know you will too.